So, hi everyone, welcome to this week's edition of the Recruitment Reality podcast. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Ariana and Scott, who are from Greenhouse, which is one of our favourite partners for sure. It's actually probably the partner that most of the enterprise clients that we work with actually utilise. It's a really great product. I absolutely love it. And they're from two very different sides of the business, actually. One kind of more internal growth focused, and the other more focused on the customer side. And I will absolutely do them a disservice if I do the introduction. So rather than me doing it, I'm going to hand over to them both. Ariana, it'd be great if you could just give us a quick intro to yourself, your background at Greenhouse, and yeah, that'd be great.
Totally. Thank you so much for having us on. I'm excited about this conversation. So I'm Ariana. I am the head of talent planning and acquisition at Greenhouse, which basically means I run a fabulous team of recruiters, coordinators, sourcers, operations folks, who partner all across the business to deliver on our hiring needs. A little bit about me. I'm a born and raised New Yorker, although where I'm taking this call right now is in Las Vegas because I am a COVID transplant. And that's primarily because my husband and I, we really were a fan of being outdoors. And not a lot of people know this, but Las Vegas is home to some wonderful mountains. And let's just say I'm not fun to be around when I get cold. So that was another reason we're out here. So that's a little bit about me. I think when it comes to my journey at Greenhouse so far, I'm coming up on 8 years at Greenhouse, which is, pretty wild for me to say. Uh, in terms of it having been so many years, I feel like I've been at several different companies throughout those 8 years because Greenhouse has changed so much. And so just to give some context on like that scale of change, when I first started, the company was like 60, 70 people in a scrappy New York office, open floor plan. Everyone's just kind of like talking at if you needed to have a meeting, you just like stood up from your desk and you're like shouted at someone. And now we're, well over 800 people. We are a global organization. We have upwards of 7,000 customers at this point. And so very different stage. But I think I've been extremely fortunate to be able to experience what high growth feels like, and to grow, throughout my career as well. So if you have more, you want to learn about that, I'm happy to chat. But in the spirit of keeping these intros a little more succinct, let me pass it off to Scott for an intro.
Just before you jump in, Scott, am I right in thinking, Ariana, that your team is now almost the same size as Greenhouse was when you joined?
Yeah, almost. So I lead a team of 40 folks distributed around the world. So
Which is
yeah,
crazy.
not too not too far off there. I've never
That's
thought of it
amazing.
that way. That's interesting.
Yeah, I remember that from our sort of pre-call, and I just thought that was such an incredible journey to go from a company where literally the 40th person from you is the CEO or whatever. Not saying they're that
Yeah,
far away, but you know what I
right,
mean. To now, the 40th person from you is not even outside of your own team,
right,
which is
right.
just crazy, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an amazing journey, and look forward to hearing more about it. Sorry, Scott, I cut you right off there, so please go ahead.
No worries. My name is Scott. I've been at Greenhouse approaching 2 years in April. What I help to do is manage our enterprise level clients here at Greenhouse, right? So making sure that everybody's getting the most out of Greenhouse that they can, helping them understand what our product and our roadmap is going to look like over the next couple of months, and really how they can just be the best they can be at hiring, right? That's our general philosophy, and we, I think, implement a lot of best practices and philosophies around that. So just helping to make sure that that's translated effectively to our clients through our different product and feature sets throughout their life cycle. I guess a little bit about myself. Based around the New York area in a town called Hoboken, New Jersey. My background primarily is actually in marketing and advertising. So Greenhouse is my first real entrance into kind of recruiting and the applicant tracking aspect. One thing, Andrew, that you kind of mentioned when we initially started was that though I don't have necessarily, as much background in recruiting as I do years of experience in general. I've been around recruiting my entire career, right? So I've done a ton of hiring for teams that I've helped to manage, and every job that I've interviewed for and applied for, a lot of them have actually been through Greenhouse, and you don't realize the different best practices that are picked up, and as a candidate, what you enjoy throughout that process and how that makes you perceive that company that you're interviewing for differently. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit as well, but I'm happy to be here, happy to be within the space, and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about recruitment is everybody, you can be a recruitment expert, but the reality is most people are in their own lived experience, because you've either hired a load of people or you've at least been hired, if you're in the workforce. So everybody has such a strong opinion, and rightly so, on like what does a good recruitment process actually look like. And I think that's one of the very unique things about the industry that all three of us are in is it's real. You really can't get away from it, actually, which is a good thing. Not that I'm trying to run away from it or anything like that. And I guess what I'm really interested to explore, especially because I know within your sort of customer base, Scott, you've got global organizations that will be having multiple challenges across multiple geographies. We, very similar situation. And then Ariana, I know obviously the scale of growing and all of that kind of stuff in your business. So I'd imagine between the three of us, we've got quite a good view of, what is the recruitment challenge that people are facing at the moment. It'd be great, Scott, to kind of start with you around, what are you seeing in the market? What are customers telling you about not just Greenhouse, but, their recruitment pains and how technology can perhaps help them overcome them at the moment?
Yeah, I think over the past 2 years, we've seen dramatic shifts in what recruitment looks like at a company in general, right? I think with starting COVID, there's a lot of instability, and there was a lot of just hesitancy about what the market's going to look like. And as this occurs over the past couple of years, I think our conversations have always changed within our customers. And at one point, it's how can we hire as many people as possible, and more recently, it's come down to the fact of we might be focusing on more higher priority roles. We want to get very strategic with our hiring, but also let's get back to the foundation of why we signed up with Greenhouse. And that's going to be, let's standardize our interviews, and let's make sure that our job names are standardized, and let's make sure that the interview plan is consistent across the entire hiring base. So it's really just going back to that foundation, like I was saying, and making sure that you're getting the most out of Greenhouse that you can. And what we can do as customer success is kind of jumping in and saying, all right, let's do a complete feature audit, right? Let's understand what you're currently doing within Greenhouse, what you're doing great at, and where there might be some gaps that we can help resolve over the next couple of months, why there might be that slowdown. So that when hiring does inevitably ramp back up, you're going to be in an incredible position to do it at a speed that is going to be scalable, right? So you have this interview plan in place. You're going to hire X number of candidates, and you're going to do so in a way that's going to be fair and equitable to make sure that everybody's getting the same experience. And when you do make that hire, for a fact that hire is going to be the best candidate out there. You're not going off of a gut feeling. You're going purely off of data, which is what a lot of the conversations that we have is around, right? Making sure that you have data-backed decisions so you can just make the best hire. And I think that's what we're all about.
Awesome. And I think it's super interesting where the world is at the moment from a recruitment standpoint, because you have some companies that are still desperately difficult, to find talent for. And, they might be even hiring slower, but actually the talent pool just hasn't got any bigger still. So it's not, there haven't been, whilst it might feel like it, there haven't been that many layoffs or anything like that. And talent is still really sparse, especially good talent. That's one part. And then the other part is what I've seen anyway is companies focusing more on the efficiency of their process as opposed to, adding more recruiting heads for example. So actually trying to squeeze out more efficiency from the technology, the automation, and the team and their knowledge, whilst then also, I think one of the big dangers of efficiency is losing sight of diversity and inclusion, actually, because it's hard. It's not easy to be focused on diversity and inclusion. It's much easier to just focus on efficiency and speed to hire, actually. Um, I wonder how much of those kind of pains resonate in your world, Ariana, from an internal
Yeah.
perspective and just people that you're speaking to in your network.
Yeah, I think to comment on one of the things that you were saying around efficiency first, the thing that came to mind there is I think when we think about our work to do as a TA function, there's efficiency, like what processes and systems do you have in place to move really fast? Then there's effectiveness, which is a different thing, which is like, what programs do you have set up based on your target groups, your users, the people you're collaborating with, and also also compliance. Like that's something that we always have to think about. So those three things kind of like balance each other in how a team should operate. If you over index on efficiency, for example, to your point, you can take a hit on how effective your processes might be from like an inclusivity perspective. So that's definitely one thought that sparked based on the comment that you just made.
No, that's a great point. And I guess to rebuild upon what you're saying, I think now we're getting to the point where companies are realizing we need somebody that really understands that, because whether we're hiring for 3 people or 3,000 people, the philosophy and the best practices are going to stay the same, again, of using data and structured hiring to make that right hire.
It's such an important point. And to anybody that's ever complained about there are no good ATSs, it's just not true. What's true in most circumstances is you're asking somebody who just wants to be talent focused to be tech focused, when actually what you really need is somebody to bridge the gap between the two, like a recruitment operations director or
Exactly.
something like that, somebody that loves people and loves technology and knows how to get the most out of it. And that's, this is, you see, you talk about when somebody develops a bit of software, you talk about technical debt. Well, you can have technical debt just from setting something up badly. If you really don't fully understand how it works and work hard to make it work for your organization in a structured way, you can end up with something that you then launch to your team that isn't fit for purpose. So you really need, it's not even a champion, it's an implementer, right? It's somebody that really wants to get in and do stuff. One thing, just about, you obviously keep talking about data. You say potato, I say data. The thing I wanted to know, and I think listeners would want to know, is in this period that we're in of planning that you talked about, Ariana, and this is a question again to either of you, what is the data that people should be looking at? Like what are we actually trying to draw out of Greenhouse so that we can plan more effectively, so that we can give both efficiency and have effectiveness? What data should we be looking at?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my mind goes to 3 areas. And I'll start more general and then maybe discuss how you can potentially pull that from Greenhouse. When we think about where can we most effectively recruit folks, those 3 areas to me are: what is your distributed hiring strategy, meaning what location, if any, are you going to target? What is your target cost, right? Not just maybe in terms of salary or local cost of labor, but also like, are you investing real estate in certain places? Do you expect your talent to go to said real estate in this day and age? And then there's one thing that you mentioned at the top of our call, which is the diversity piece, right? And so it is a business critical thing to focus on. And so when it comes to things like diversity, one of my most favorite reports in Greenhouse is the candidate demographic data. Like based on how candidates um, elect to provide data or not, you can see how different demographics are converting through your hiring pipelines. And
Wow.
so, we've run analyses where there are certain locations where, despite our as much proactive diversity sourcing efforts we invested in, the pipeline was just not reflecting um, representation that was in line with our workforce diversity goals. And so we shifted the strategy and said, hey, let's maybe not focus 80% of our hiring in Colorado. Why don't we open it up to being more distributed? That's an actual conversation that we had about a year and a half ago. So that to me is one of my favorite reports because we even review it at the executive level. So all throughout 2021, I would sit down with our entire executive team and say, like, this is our pipeline demographic data. And based on what we're seeing that's working or what's not, here are our recommendations or here are our challenges. This is what we need your support on to kind of message and cascade down to the hiring managers in your department. So there was a lot of attention and eyes on that. I spoke to the location piece a little bit about how that feeds also into the diversity sourcing strategy, and the cost piece around compensation. Like that is one of the hottest topics right now in not just like HR land, like companies in general that are looking to succeed, especially companies that have gotten rid of offices or became more open to distributed work. If you historically grounded salaries based on where you physically are, like what does that mean? Um, I'm not sure how aware you are of this, but November 1st, there's a New York pay transparency law going into effect, and so a
Yeah.
bunch of companies right now are hustling um, around two things. What are the things I need to do to be minimally compliant to this law? But then second, there's a greater conversation around like pay transparency in general, right? Like whatever step you take for that to be compliant to that New York pay transparency law, you do want it to be part of a larger pay transparency strategy, which is a conversation we're also having at Greenhouse. Because I think, like in general, there's acknowledgement in the industry that pay transparency is a good thing. However, you have to provide a lot of education around it so that people understand the why around your methodology. Um, and so those are the three things that are probably the most top of mind for me right now. On the compensation front, Greenhouse has actually been really helpful because we document compensation expectations of every single
Oh,
person that we
really?
talk to.
Wow.
Yeah, and we have a pretty solid compensation philosophy that's rooted in being equitable, right? We're not just going to like, throw out big numbers in terms of cash just because someone asks for it. It all has to be rooted in the philosophy that is enforced throughout the company. So, but we were competing against companies that were just like paying at the top percentile in reaction to the market. And so what my team ended up doing is we gathered a lot of candidate expectations, um, and kind of what they were seeing, what we were seeing from a counter offer or a competitive offer perspective, putting together that data and helping, people like department heads make decisions on whether they needed to adjust their pay bands. And so I think that's a good example of how TA can partner with you in a strategic way. It's not just about, you know, winning candidates and throwing whatever you can at them. It's about, well, how do you do that in a way that's actually fair to your current employees and scalable in the long run? And that will be sustained beyond this like really hot market situation right now. So I think I need to take a pause because I feel like I've been talking for like 5 minutes straight, but
It's
hopefully,
all good.
hopefully
I
that
think the
answers your
compensation
question.
side of things is like it's so difficult because we know as an employer that if you put it's a competitive salary, that people automatically assume that means it's not competitive, mainly. So if you don't have transparency or a range or anything like that, but then we also know that if you have a salary that maybe looks higher than the standard market rate, you're less likely to get female applicants, for example, because they don't feel that they are worthy. They're more realistic on their salary expectations, which is just not helpful in the slightest. The funny or the most difficult thing, and I'd love your feedback on this, is like I'd almost want to go out with the job get everybody's salary expectations, then put the salary that we're going to offer, and then find the right person. It's because what you don't want is to damage what somebody's salary expectation is going to be by putting a number against it that is totally wrong, either totally too low or totally too high. Do you know what I mean? So actually,
Yeah.
it's so difficult to, as a small business, to get that salary benchmark kind of right. So
Yeah.
I think that you can pull the various data points you were talking about. So expectations, market, and offer acceptance, counter offers. That gives you a huge view, right?
Yeah. 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 Two thoughts that come to mind there. I think in theory, that sounds great. I think, like, that whole saying, in theory, theory and reality are the same, but in reality, they're different.
Yeah.
I think that's one of those things where um, I think what I heard from you is taking live data from the market and creating your bands, creating competitive bands based on current state of market expectations. I think the challenge of that is, well, what does that mean for your current employees who are locked in a certain number for a role?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's where things get inequitable really fast if you don't have strong principles that you're leading with. And so, like, that's
Yeah.
always a challenge that I think you have to balance.
I think the difference in my scenario is, as a small business, if I found out that I was paying my people less than I should be, and I didn't know, I think this is one of the most common misconceptions of counteroffers, is that people don't pay people what they think they are valued. So when they get an offer, they then counteroffer them, and the person that counteroffered is the big bad wolf because they should have just given them the money earlier. I
Yeah.
actually don't think that that's true. I think the reality is, if somebody from my team went somewhere else, got offered a better job or a bigger salary, came back to me, and I said, well, I'll match the salary, it'll simply be because I did not know that was the market rate. It's
Yeah.
not the fact that I don't think that they're worth it. So it's so filled with different challenges from both sides, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I know that, because of that issue, a lot of companies will have like annual review processes. I think it depends on what sort of compensation team you have or what sort of proactiveness that they can actually um, uphold from a strategic perspective.
Mm,
I think the other thing I was going to say is, a lot of people use market data from sources like Radford or Willis Towers Watson, like these big um, companies that sit on a lot of compensation data. But the reality is, like, that data is dated as well. I mean, it depends on which pool you're pulling from, but some data sets can be 6 months to more years old. And I think what we saw in the last 2 years is things were changing so fast
yeah,
that
it's, it's impossible.
the reason my recruiters were taking the approach that they were in gathering market expectations and kind of marrying that with our philosophy inside is because the data that we were using to establish comp eds in the first place were becoming outdated really fast. Um, so I think that's another challenge, like that real time reaction to a market and like what sources you're using to determine compensation in the first place. Like, I know that's a challenge that a lot of companies are dealing with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, the model that I would always prefer, just as a business owner, is actually like have a relationship, and we can do this because we're not many people, 12 people. We might work in 120 countries or whatever, or the business might have clients in 120 countries, but we're still really small. Is to have a relationship where I can say, look, if you're not happy, I think you should go and interview somewhere else and see, what is it you're not happy about, and come back with feedback and have that level of open, relationship with your people. That's much more difficult to trickle down once you're a 500-person company and give managers the confidence to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. It feeds back into the whole talent planning side of things, and actually
Well,
taking these
here's
things more.
maybe one more one more story I'll share. Um, Comp isn't everything to candidates also, right?
Absolutely not.
It
Yeah.
can be to some people, but that's the really fascinating thing about recruiting. I think recruiting, if I were to sum it up in like one sentence, it's really about discovering someone's why. Like if you know someone's why they're looking, what's motivating them, like what's important to them, um, that's the information that you're looking for to be able to determine like is this role the right one for you. So one example of like comp not being, the only important thing is when I was hiring for more recruiters in 2021, that was probably one of the hardest searches I've run. And you might think like hiring recruiters is like really it's easier than hiring an engineer. Why are you saying that? Because the whole world was looking for recruiters really desperately at
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
time. And so our offer rejection rate was never as high for recruiters as it was in 2021. And yes, did salary come into play? Totally. At the same time, like, um, there were situations where I went into a conversation with someone and I was like, you're totally not going to accept the offer because based on where you leveled, this is the compensation. And it's like, 20, 30K below your expectations. Um, but I've had situations where people were on board with joining the team because what I positioned it as was like, look, here's the comp for the role based on the leveling you were leveled at, but also here's your career path. Like we promote pretty quickly on our team if you hit certain milestones, and some of these folks that I've had these conversations with ultimately accepted and they're thriving, right? So like at the end of the day, like it's not just about the number on the piece of paper that you're offering someone. It's about what is their long-term career trajectory in this role that they're going to join today, and like what is the opportunity for growth look like. So I swear that's the last thing I want to say on that topic. But that story came to mind because again, it's not, yes, comp is like the hottest topic, but it's not only about comp.
In my opinion, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because this is absolutely an outside British view, but in my opinion, the whole legislation that's coming in is a lot about driving, equality of offers, comp plans, etc. It's not about attracting candidates to your business. It's about fairness, really, and trying to have disclosure that's going to drive that fairness. Hopefully, I'm right on that. Scott, maybe it would be good to just explore some things from the customer world. Maybe you got specific examples, not naming names, but just around this whole thought of like data comp plans. Implementing a process, leveraging your technology to find the best talent. Have you got some specific examples maybe of companies that and I love the fact that you talked about distributed workforces. I mean, that makes comp plans even more difficult, but we won't go back into that. Do you play skill set or location? There's a big question. So it would be great to just know if you've got any sort of specific examples, Scott, where people are really leveraging the power of Greenhouse in a specific process.
Yeah. So in terms of compensation, I think on the customer team, we don't have, and we choose not to have much insight into that because that is all handled by the customer and their employee. And I think at Greenhouse, we just try to promote best practices and utilizing the system and whatnot. In terms of general processes, I mean, there have been situations where, one example as a company, as a major, media company that's employs thousands of people, where they're not utilizing the most basic aspects of Greenhouse and just recruiting in general, right? So I'm talking a little bit about CRM here. I would be talking with a customer and kind of understanding what they've utilized from Greenhouse and, taking a digger look into the fact that, why aren't you utilizing our CRM and what are you doing during the slower times of hiring and what are you doing to build a talent pipeline that you can really draw from? And there were things they were doing, right? They were doing things out of Greenhouse via Google Sheets or some other platforms, but they were never utilizing Greenhouse's CRM product that, to be honest, they were paying for. So why not use it and try it out? So we kind of work to slowly build out what we call talent pools, right? So these buckets of candidates that you're going to categorize these candidates into under a certain commonality, right? So if it might be silver medal candidates, so candidates that have gone very, very far but didn't get the job, or they might have been referrals or friends and family, or engineers or software developers, whatever they may be. You're going to develop out these buckets that you can then pull from later on when you need to build a talent pool, and when you need to understand where can I continuously dig into that talent and see where they're at. So instead of starting from square one, we have this talent pool already that we can choose from, and we can nurture that a little better and say, listen, we understand that you unfortunately didn't move forward or didn't get the role that you were initially applying for, but we honestly do think you'd be a better fit for this one. What are your thoughts on going ahead and applying? And I think you're already getting into contact with the candidate. You know that they are interested in greenhouse, and you might have some of their salary expectations, for example. You might know some of their other backgrounds that would be applicable for the role. And then you just go ahead and convert them over to a candidate for that role that would be applicable there. So absolutely. I loved seeing that. Yeah, it was incredible to see building those talent pools, even utilizing prospect posts, right? So that may be a post on your career page that says, don't see the role you're interested for, go ahead and apply, and we'll keep your resume in file. Greenhouse does an incredible job just internally, right? Like having that on their webpage, knowing that they're going to collect candidates that they can tap into later on. So that's kind of best practices that I've always shared with clients that are looking to build that up and do something during the slow time when they may not necessarily be hiring as much as they used to.
Yeah, and I think to the other points around data, I mean, it really does blow my mind when large organisations are not looking at the people that have applied, it's the great terms, the silver medalists, because they might have been wrong at one point. They've probably got 6 months more experience, and they're probably an amazing candidate for a different role in your business, but they're gone. So let's go find another one. They're probably no longer interested. Whereas if you harness that community, that talent pool, there's two things. One, they will undoubtedly become your candidates of the future if you do it well, and they could be great talent. Two, all of our questions that we've talked about around compensation, around what's your why, what put you off us in the past, we offered you the job and you turned it down. 6 months later, how do you feel about what we offered you, and reflective of what you've seen our business do over that time, and what do you love about where you have ended up? I can imagine how much data you could get out of that talent pool if you just spent a bit of time actually digging into it.
Well, I think that's often the blocker, the bit of time piece, right? Like, we take talent pools pretty seriously on my team. And so I have like a dedicated TA program manager who focuses on enablement, who basically project manages our prospect pools and makes sure that we go through the applications, we sort them accordingly, because we have like an internal set of pools based on how someone expressed interest in a role or what department we think that they might be a good fit in. That takes work. And I think a lot of the times when people think about recruiting, they mostly think about processing people through a live funnel. But this is another version of a funnel. It's just a different time scale that you have to manage. And I think a lot of companies are sitting on amazing talent in their database, and they just don't have the muscle of returning to it because, again, it's a different way of thinking about recruiting to kind of like recruit from your own existing pool. I think the same thing can be said. I was actually having an interesting conversation with someone from our product team. And that conversation was, we're getting to a size as a company where we're approaching 1,000 people. Our current employees are also our internal talent pools for our existing jobs. And so is there a world where like for every single employee at Greenhouse, they have, there's a talent pool for all existing employees, which, again, would take the work of like managing and updating it. But it's that same idea, like managing talent pools are so powerful, and they take a lot of work, which is, I think, tends to be a blocker why customers immediately just don't jump into realizing the value of it. But if you do organize them and you do have a process, like just imagine a world where like, a good chunk of your hiring, you're hiring silver medalists. I was actually talking to one of the heads of recruiting at eBay not so long ago, and they have this really awesome programmatic. Um, they have this program where for I think they called it apprenticeships, but for people who apply to apprenticeships or internships and don't get the job or rejected your offer, they all get placed into a talent pool where, but the next year, you don't return to that talent pool if you're looking for interns again. You look into that talent pool when you're looking for, full-time professionals early in
First
their career,
jobbers. Yeah.
right? So to be systematic
That's,
in your approach of how you leverage talent pools, like
yeah.
the value of that is not immediately seen unless you've like experienced it yourself in hiring a silver medalist. Um, but I feel like that unlocks so much value.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the idea. Maybe I don't know whether you have this feature or not, but imagine if you had this amazing feature where when you reject a candidate, you kind of tag some sort of level of experience that they have, and put that tag in there, and then you put a predictive number of how many more years, months, whatever it would take for them to reach
Mm.
each stage. Could you imagine how cool that would be?
Ooh,
And
I
then you
see where
go
you're
back to
going.
your talent pool, and very similar to the eBay thing, you basically go, right, well, now I want to filter by predictive experience level based on the
Yeah.
conversation I had with them, based on where they ended up, based on what they'd done before, etc., and the time that has elapsed between now and then.
Yeah.
Like, how cool
That
would
that
that
would be
be?
fascinating. That would be
Yeah.
great.
There you go. That one's for free. Um,
That sounds complicated to build.
I wanted to quickly just end that part of the conversation with just revisiting the human side of it, right? I think as a candidate, you hear so many times that you weren't a great fit for this role. We'll keep your resume on file for another year and whatever. And you automatically just say, okay, cool, I'll never hear from you again. But
yeah,
when you actually hear from a
yeah.
company in 6 months
You're
saying, we think you'd be a great fit, I mean, you feel incredible as a candidate, but also you feel like you're being looked at by that company as a human, not just somebody that's attached to this job, but somebody that's being looked at as a candidate in general for any job. And I think even internally, should, like Ariana was saying, I think it takes a lot of logistics around poaching your internal employees for another role. But I think being looked at by your own company as somebody who, we think you're great in this role, but have you considered this? Because I think we know your skill set, we know you're a great person, and we think you'd be a great fit here. Um, Compensation becomes so much less important because you feel more valued as a human and as an employee and as a candidate.
absolutely.
I think companies have to start realizing that as just hiring gets harder in general.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things. So I actually saw an advert for an internal mobility partner. So just somebody that moves people around. Giant organisation. And I used to work for Randstad, if you know it, which
Yeah, of
employs
course.
tens of thousands of people, 34 billion euro turnover business, and they had a pretty good internal sort of job thing. But what I saw in my small part of the business was it wasn't until somebody quit that they
Mm.
then would go, oh, we've also got this other job. What
Yeah.
about that? Whereas internally, these are two different conversations, really. Your talent pool is totally different, but I totally agree, Scott. Like making them feel special and actually remembering them one way or another in the future, and making them feel valued as they've invested a lot of time in your process makes a huge difference. But internally, the worst thing you can do is it's like disaster recovery. We're losing a great person, so we better throw a load of jobs at them. It's got to again be led by the top of the organization that if you are starting to feel unhappy, if something is niggling at you, why not see what else there is within the business? And let's have that open conversation. I'm not going to fire you. And if you decide to leave the business because we can't find what's right for you, then fair enough. And that actually happened for me within my smaller organization. And I did benefit from that. I sat down with the MD, and he was literally like, "We don't want to lose you. I can see that you're not feeling totally motivated right now. so what other options are there? Can we move you? Can we do different things? And that was it. It wasn't I'd
Yeah,
handed in my notice and they tried to save me.
I think this is, oh my goodness, I wish that we had another hour to talk about this because um, I think there are so many people that move on from their current job, a lot of people that participated in the Great Resignation because of things that were unsaid or because of things that were unknown. And I think one of the most powerful practices that I encountered at Greenhouse and that a lot of teams put into place uh, during like the thick of COVID was what we called stay conversations, right? Like a set of questions that managers ask their every single employee. Questions like, um, if you took another job offer, for what reason would you take
Mm.
it? Or if you can wave a magic wand and you can change anything about your role today, what would it be? I
Mm-hmm.
worked with someone and managed this person for 3 years. I asked them those questions and I got an answer I've never heard before. And I
Yeah,
was like,
wow.
oh my gosh, you care about that. Let's invest, let's put you on a path to that.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because there was the great resignation, then there was the great rehiring because you're hiring all these people that have resigned. And then there was the great regret, which is a lot of people, they regret the moves that they made because they made them for maybe reasons that felt right in the context of that moment, but like maybe weren't the
Mainly,
most
mainly
sustainable reason.
money. Mainly
Right.
money.
And I think like, again, a big part of being a manager right now is really complex because in this virtual world of work, like there's just so many layers to management. But one of them is really uncovering, again, goes back to the why. Why are your employees staying? What do they want? What motivates them? And like, how can you, it's part of your hiring and retention strategy to know that. Like, if they want to move into a different role, like, do you know that? And can you help them
Yeah,
find that opportunity?
yeah. And there's just ask every one to one. Well, not every one to one.
Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely overdo those questions. I genuinely, to the point where somebody that worked for me, she has sadly moved to Australia, which I saw coming, thankfully. But there's nothing we can do to keep her because she's going to be on the wrong side of the planet, which is very sad. But she actually said to me at one point, she was like, "Are you expecting there to be something wrong?" And I was like, "No, I just never want there to be something I don't know about that
Yeah.
is wrong. That's the point. Like, I
Yeah.
might labour this question: is it what can we improve? What do you like about your job? What do you dislike? Where are you going? All of these, goal focused and job focused questions to the point where maybe it gets annoying. Um, but I'd much rather that and know what's coming,
Yeah.
and make sure I can help and overcome those problems. So
It's
Yeah.
funny. One of my favorite managers outside of Greenhouse, of course, during our one-on-ones, it was always, "How are you feeling?" Right on a scale of 1 to 10, but you cannot use 7, right? Because I think that
Mhm.
forces your employees to really dig in and
yeah,
understand how they feel. Because I think an 8 is, you're feeling good, you're feeling happy. And
you're tip
yeah,
top.
and a 6 is like there's something there, and there shouldn't be anything in the middle, right? If there's something there, you should vocalize that.
Yeah,
And I thought that was a very interesting exercise because it forced you to be honest and transparent, and there was nothing wrong with that. It just, as a manager, it helps you anticipate what may be going on and put them on a career path that might be better fit for them if there's one. So that
yeah.
was
Well,
super.
that's why I get ridiculed for all these things. This is a funny and totally unrelated story in one way, but I have a alphabetized log of all of my DVDs. Yes, I still have DVDs, and I've rated them 1 to 4, and that's because I learned doing competency frameworks and large scale assessment centers, that if you do 1 to 5, everybody votes 3. So actually, you have to be one side of the fence if you have a 4, right? And that's a similar thing. Like if you're going to ask somebody to give you a rating of how they're feeling, don't allow them, especially if you're British, to be in the middle because they'll just always be in the middle because nobody wants to complain, nobody wants to be too happy. Um, Whereas if you have 4, 8, whatever, you have to be
Yeah,
one side of content or the other,
and and
which is
Ariana
very
might actually,
interesting.
I guess, tying this back to our actual product, and Ariana might have some more insight here. I think that's why we've also developed scorecards that are strong no, no, yes, and strong yes. There's no middle ground there because we've seen that
Yeah,
the more you're going to put that, the more you will either stay in the middle or some cultures would be more
absolutely.
positive or negative. And I think this forces somebody to make a decision based on data, right? If you're going to say yes or no, you're going to have that information behind it, which you would have explained further up in focus attributes or your reasoning why you agree or disagree with the hire there.
Yeah.
I also think it's an important point that actually, when you're looking back at the data, if you've got a middle option, if you're allowing people to do middle options, everybody that they hate for a certain reason, they will put them as the middle option, actually, because
Yep.
it's a cop out.
Yeah.
So that mentality is actually so important for driving accurate data, is making sure that your competency framework and your scorecards represent your genuine feeling towards that individual. So it's really
Yeah.
important. Sorry, Ariana, you were going to say something.
I was just going to add a tidbit around the whole like not being a yes or a no. Scott is absolutely right. Like your your job in an interview process, especially if you're using Greenhouse, is to ask a specific set of questions that is tied very specifically to certain attributes that you determine someone needs for the role. And so you have, again, a very specific job as an interviewer that isn't the same as any other interviewer's job in that process. And so if you come back and say, I asked all these questions, or, I did this interview, but I'm a no decision. I don't know if I'm a yes or a no. The going joke that we used to say was, okay, the only reason you can be not have an answer is somehow in the middle of the interview you were abducted by aliens and you weren't able to finish your kid. Like that's the excuse that you can use. Otherwise, like if you're going to do your job is to assess for these things. And so if you ask the questions and you got answers, like you should have enough data to be like, hey, is this person a yes or a no? And to be able to justify that. That's the other thing. Like you can also say, I'm a yes or I'm a no, but a lot of people don't provide the data to be able to
Mm.
back that up. And so, one of our product features that sure people grumbled a lot when we first rolled it out, but it's really meaningful. One of our product features is instead of just clicking yes and no on an interview, you have a list of, let's say, like 5 attributes you're assessing across. You have to provide like specific feedback on each attribute and you rate each attribute. So if you're looking for
Yeah.
someone who's collaborative, like, and you say yes to that attribute specifically, like, why specifically did you mark that as yes? Not from like an overall interview perspective, but on like a granular attribute perspective. Um, and I mentioned that there's always a little change management associated with that, but what that results in is people seeing the value of having highly informed interview feedback
Absolutely.
that you can also return to like post hire. Like if someone didn't work out and you want to go back and
Or
see
if they
like
did.
what was the feedback, right? You can see it. Whereas like in the past, if you just have a yes or a no, you're like, I don't know why this was a yes. I don't know why this was a
Yeah.
Yeah.
I rated them a 3 and a yes, and I have no idea why. I really like, and I haven't really talked about Willo at all, which is rare for me on a call. But I like the I don't know whether either of you have even seen it, but with Willo and Greenhouse, you score within Greenhouse. You use the scorecards within Greenhouse, and Willo just opens up in a separate window altogether. And what I really love is the ability to have what I would say an entirely consistent process using Willo, which is asynchronous. You ask the same questions to the same candidate. There's no bias in your questioning because they are literally being asked exactly the same thing. You then go into your scorecard where you've got your attributes and you have to give meaningful data to those attributes. You then have to score the person. That is a hugely auditable process
Yeah.
because you can not only look at what you rated the person, you can see what they actually said for each of their answers. You can hear, you can read, all of that stuff. And I think just tying that data together, it can only be a good thing when, like you say, if somebody leaves too soon, where did my process go wrong? There's no such thing as a bad person. It's a bad hiring process 9 times out of 10. So where did I go wrong? Where did I miss things? And then the other side is exactly 3 years on. what did I write about this person? What did I see? And how do I get more of them? Because they're going to be the CEO of this business. And I want to know what attributes I saw. So super interesting stuff. So I'm going to wrap up. I'm just going to ask, I think I know the kind of bits of advice that people should be leaving this with. Firstly, it's when times are slow, plan and understand talent pools, etc. Secondly, it's look at your data really and dig into what meaningful data actually is. Use your CRM properly, and then I think the final part, and we'll leave compensation to somebody else, but the final part would be around that talent pool, and I've talked about it before. I just think people miss so much talent because they ignore the people that had a great experience before, and they forget about them, don't follow them up, and that point you made, Scott, around the value that somebody says when a hiring manager says, "Oh, if we do have another role, feel free to reapply." Instead of doing that, we've got another role and we think you should reapply. That's a totally different message.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that either of you, as a tip or otherwise, would want to add at the end of that?
I actually do have one, given this
Awesome.
current climate, which is maybe like a message to anyone who's listening that's being put in a challenging situation around like, what do I do with my recruiting team if I'm not recruiting? And I think when we look at recruiters, we need to look at them as a multifaceted set of skills, not a title. If you think about what recruiters do, like they're exceptional program managers in a way. They are people with lots of usually great people skills, high bias for action, get shit done mentality. And I guess, the reason I'm saying this is because I would challenge people to think about recruiters being repurposable as like a bundle of skill sets in your org, even if you're not hiring. I think at Greenhouse, we have a certain advantage because our recruiters are subject matter experts of our product, because obviously we have our own champagne. And so we've had, recruiters from my team grow to become CSMs, even product managers, even sales engineers. That career path exists at our company, which I think is unique. But even if it doesn't, even if you're not a hiring software company, think of your recruiters as more than just a title doing a very specific thing. So that would be kind of my urge to any business leader that's looking at a recruiting team and being like, I don't need them because I'm not hiring. Well, you will at some point.
Yeah.
So how do you take a long-term view, and how do you look to, the point you two were making earlier, how do you look at a person for their potential and them as a human, not just a name on a resume or a title?
Absolutely. Well, and it's what skills have they got? I mean, any recruiter can be a salesperson or some sort of sales discipline, CSM, whatever. Scott, anything you'd want to leave with?
As a company, you bought Greenhouse for a reason. And whether you're in the cycle of hiring for only 3 or 3,000, don't forget about that reason you bought Greenhouse. If it's going to be for standardizing the interview processes, if it's going to be for DE&I or reporting or data, it's very easy to forget all of those aspects when you're moving very quick. And you have to remember those foundations to be sustainable and effective in your hiring, or else you're just going to be where you were before Greenhouse with Greenhouse. So why don't you use the product to the best of the ability? And we're here to help you for that. But it's important to just remember that foundational aspect.
Yeah, awesome. And I think, just cultivate an amazing community of talent whilst you don't need them, because then when you do, it'll be a lot easier to get them. Exactly. Well, look, thank you both so much. In terms of getting in contact, I'm guessing the best place is LinkedIn, etc. So please feel free to connect with. I'm saying that. I hope that people are free to connect with you, but we'll find out.
Yes, totally.
And as I said, we work with Greenhouse a lot, especially with big clients. And I just love the way that Willo works within the system itself. It's been a super interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks everybody for listening. Please Again, my dad told me off for not saying this on enough podcasts, which is embarrassing. But don't forget to subscribe and like. It helps more than you know, as Stephen Bartlett would say. So thanks very much, everyone, and have a good week.
Cool. Thanks all.
Hi, guys.